Welcome to Banyen Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyen.com. Since 1970, Banyen Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyen.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Branches of Wisdom, the Banyen Books podcast and live streaming event series. I'm your host, Ross Mckeachie. Delighted tonight that we have Karla McLaren with us speaking about the Language of Emotions Workbook. Before I fully introduce her, Banyen Books acknowledges that although we have people joining us from all over the world for these live streaming events, the physical location of Banyen Books and Sound is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Most of Banyen's podcast and event series are free, and we welcome your donations to keep these programs accessible for all. Just go ahead and click on the PayPal link down below, and we accept your donations gratefully. And also, towards the end of our conversation today, we will be taking questions from you, the live audience, for Karla McLaren. So please start typing them into the chat as we get into the conversation, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Our guest this evening, Karla McLaren, M.Ed., is an award-winning author, social science researcher, and empathy innovator. She is CEO of Emotion Dynamics Incorporated, developer of Dynamic Emotional Integration, and creator of the empathyacademy.org online learning site. She's the author of several books, including The Language of Emotions, Embracing Anxiety, The Art of Empathy, The Power of Emotions at Work, and the multimedia online course, Emotional Flow. This evening, Karla McLaren is with Banyen Books in conversation about the Language of Emotions Workbook, a practical guide to reveal the wisdom in each of your feelings. Of course, it's a companion to the award-winning book, The Language of Emotions. We've been told that emotions are mostly problems, but nothing could be further from the truth. Emotions do not create problems. They contain the exact genius you need to solve those problems. In her new The Language of Emotions Workbook, Karla McLaren teaches simple ways to access the brilliant wisdom in your emotions to create a deeply meaningful, healing, and awakened life. Learn more about our guest at her website, karlamclaren.com. Banyen community, join me in a very warm welcome for Karla McLaren.
Hello, Ross. It's
Hello,
so nice
how are
to see you. Good. I'm well. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you too.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here.
So I wanted to start by kind of entering through, you wrote the first Language of Emotions, and I know there's a new revised edition that came out in 2023, but the first edition came out in 2010 because I've heard you say you looked around and you saw that no one else had created a comprehensive guide for understanding and working with emotions.
Yeah.
I'm curious, since 2010, how has the landscape changed in our society? Are we more emotionally literate now, do you think?
In some ways, in some ways, yes. In some ways, no. I was thinking of there's a kids movie called Inside
Inside Out.
There you go, Inside Out. And that one has the emotions as characters making decisions to help the person. And we see in the brain of the child or whoever's the key person, we see the emotions running the controls, right? And that thoughts are this slow moving train around the outside. And when you go to sleep, your thoughts go, pshoo. And that's pretty close to what's happening, that your emotions are, they're at the foundation of your behavior, your choices, your actions, your thoughts, your ideas, right? They're, the emotions are running the show. And I thought that was very helpful to see. Of course, it was a cartoon, right? So everything was very cartoonish and loud. But I really like that. And I haven't seen the sequel yet. Have you?
No, I haven't. It's on the list.
I gotta go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that's mainstream culture. There's in media we're seeing some shifts. Where do you think we especially still need work as a society around emotional intelligence?
I think there's still the idea that, and this comes back from Rene Descartes and the whole French, the Enlightenment, right? Rene was famous for saying, "I think, therefore I am." And what he did was he raised the intellect. I'm going
Mm.
way up here, and the intellect, which we know isn't as strong as the emotions, is, was brought into our international conversation. But the emotions were, why, they were down here, right? And there's this very much this schism of um, intellect or rationality or logic being separate from emotions. Like they're not even being considered. If you're emotional, um, you're out of, you're less intelligent. You're sort of out of control. You're in a place that's not as exalted. And that has come through the science as well. There's a understanding in the science, in brain science, and we've known this to be wrong for decades, but it will not die. And that is the concept of the triune brain. So we've got the emotional brain down here in the amygdala. When people say you're in your amygdala, they're talking triune brain. And so here is kind of like the mammalian brain. And then, oh my gosh, Rene Descartes. There's the neocortex, and it's like exalted above all. But notice that it's still Rene Descartes, situation happening.
Right.
We also don't have a left and right side brain situation either. They're not that different. But people love that splitting things into parts, and they love to take the brain and make it three parts. But there is no such thing as category emotion in the brain. Um, Emotion coming from the depths, and logic and rationality, they're like this in the brain. And there's no specific, three-layer cake of the brain. That emotion, or what we call emotion, and rationality and logic and intellect, they're all moving together. It's more like a kaleidoscope, um, than it is like a three-layer cake, right? The brain is a network. But you will find people in 2024 putting out books about the triune brain and about the left-right brain. It's such a seductive idea, right? I mean, you're just not going to kill it. Uh, it's so there's still that idea, even in brain scientists who should know better at this point, that emotions are a lower kind of a thing, right? They're not as good. They're not as good as spirituality. They're not as good as the intellect. They're just these primitive things, right? So there's people are doing a lot better, but there's still this idea that emotions are mm, untrustworthy, right? Not as good as other things that we could name. And so it really keeps people away from an understanding of how emotions are running everything, right? And if you don't know your emotions, you're not going to know yourself very well. Mhm.
You just blew my mind with what you just said about the divisions of the brain, because that's honestly, that's the first I've heard. Everybody I talk to holds that idea of the three levels and the right and left brain. So I was especially surprised the right and left brain aren't that different.
They're not that different. They're not that different, but that's another thing that it's just so seductive. It's such an exciting way to think of it, that you can split the brain down the middle, and here's your good brain and here's your danged emotional brain and stuff. So yeah, it's very interesting that if you say you use 10% of your brain, neuroscientists are going to go, oh my God, you do not. You use 100% of it. But that's just so seductive, the ideas that are out in culture as opposed to the ideas that are in the forefront of science. So isn't it strange though that we still put emotions down at the bottom?
Yes.
Like they're these you can't control them because they're just coming from your lizard brain, and lizards are like, say what? Like, have you seen humans? Have you seen you? Because don't be talking down to us lizards.
Yeah, that's not fair.
I know.
Yeah.
Lizards are like, well, okay.
Okay, so what you're pointing to here is something in the opening of this workbook, which is fantastic. It's full of practices, contemplation exercises, and really amazing insights. And what you talk about in the intro is most of us have this relationship with our emotions that we see them as a problem.
Yeah.
And you write this, but if you're like most of us, you haven't learned the most important things. And you list four things. One, what emotions are. Two, why emotions arise. Three, how emotions work. And four, how to work with all emotions skillfully. Can you kind of just give us a brief gist on each of those points a little bit? And we also have a chart to share when it's appropriate. You let us know the guide to the language of your emotions.
Yeah. So emotions are fundamental, crucial aspects of cognition, and they help you make sense of incoming data, right? Without your emotions, and there are people who neurologists have studied, and they have some kind of damage that they can't feel or access emotions. They can't make decisions. So they can take in all the information, but there's nothing inside them to tell them what the meaning is, to make meaning out of data. And so emotions help us navigate every moment of the day and the night, right? Emotions are alive when you're dreaming. And so they are fundamental to what makes us human. They are fundamental to how we understand the world and how we behave in the world. So if you don't know that and you just think of them as these, lower things that aren't as good as other things, you may miss what they're doing for you. You may not even know that they're present, right? You may not know that they're even helping you do everyday things. For instance, motivation. That is the purview of the emotion anxiety. And yet most people think of anxiety as just no good at all. Like it has no value. It's just a terrible thing. But I wrote a book about anxiety, and there's a lot about anxiety in this workbook as well. When I ask people, what is anxiety and how does it feel? To a person, including psychologists, they were describing panic. And it's a very different emotion than anxiety, although panic and anxiety do often move together. Anxiety is the emotion of motivation. Panic is the emotion that comes to save your life when you're in danger. Sometimes you're in danger because you're not getting enough done, or your job's in danger, and panic needs to come and help because there's danger and there's trouble ahead, right? But most people, their panic and anxiety are like this, and they literally don't know that there are two emotions there. And it's so helpful to know, right? What is going on, why that emotion's there, and what its purpose is.
Wow. So how do we decipher when we're in anxiety or panic? Is there some keys to look for?
Yeah. Both of them are activating emotions, right? We've all had anxiety where we've got to get something done. Anxiety is not only motivation, but it is task completion and it is deadline, meeting your deadlines, right? So if you've got way too many tasks and the deadlines are looming, your anxiety is going to need to ramp up to help you focus and get the thing done. But as we've all experienced, that can be overwhelming, right?
Mhm.
It's not the anxiety that's overwhelming. The anxiety is approaching the situation with the correct amount of energy, right? It's overwhelming and anxiety is going to help. But for most of us not knowing that, it just feels like we're being overtaken by a sort of a wildfire of the soul. Um, when panic is present, so will a sense of dread or danger be present. That's how to tell the difference. Is if there's dread or danger, or a sense of danger, panic's there to help because there's dread and danger. And this could be you're not going to meet your deadlines, you're going to let everybody down again, you may be demoted, you may lose your job, and that is a threat to your life, right? It's not just, okay, I'm not going to work tomorrow. You could lose a lot. And so panic's there saying there's danger here, so we need to get you going. The problem is you've got anxiety getting you going and you've got panic getting you going. And if you don't know what is going on, you're gonna be like, anxiety is the worst emotion ever. Okay. We just need to get rid of it. Instead of saying, okay, my anxieties are telling me some really important things and panic is here. And yeah, so I need to get serious. Right. So it's a really different way to look at emotions.
Right. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about point one for sure, what emotions are, why they arise. We were just kind of getting into that around anxiety and panic. Is there
Yeah.
anything other comments on that? And then the third is how emotions work.
Yeah, I'd say in the book that most people see emotions as problems, right? If you're angry, well, you need to calm down. And if you're anxious, you need to calm down. And if mostly you just need to calm down. Um, but they arise bringing you a specific sense making, a specific meaning making, and a specific level of energy and what I call genius to help you do the thing you need to do. So they don't create problems, they come to help you solve them. The problem is already there. When anxiety and panic came up in my first example, um, the situation was the problem, and anxiety and panic came up to help, right? They didn't create the situation. They, a lot of times will get blamed for it because you get, overtaken, but they didn't do that. That wasn't what they were doing. So that's why they arise. And to understand how to work with them is first of all to understand why they're there. Each emotion, and I have a list of 17 emotions, and that language of emotions chart is, you can link to Dropbox and download it if you like. It looks like this, and it has each of the 17 emotions, and you can see what the emotion does, why it arises, the gifts it brings you, and then questions you can ask it to work with it instead of working against it. Right. So it's bringing you intelligence, it's bringing you energy and focus, it's bringing you cognitive power. So working with it is a way to access the genius of your emotions, which always is working anyway, right? It's always there. So yeah, it's kind of a flip it on the head, um, and say, what has brought this emotion forward instead of why am I such a failure at emotions? Or, why am I such a failure that I'm having a human emotion? That's not a question we ask.
Yeah, it that defeatist attitude. I know I experience it all the time. Yeah, and where does that come from? Is that something that we're conditioned by our culture to feel that way about certain emotions?
It's constant. It's
Yeah.
constant. I it runs through conversation. Well, there's no need to be angry. Oh, fear is the opposite of love. Oh, don't cry. there's all kinds of messages we get daily, sometimes hourly, if we're on social media, that tell us that us allegedly emotional, to be allegedly emotional and allegedly calm, and to not be having any of these kind of spikes of emotion, because that's just not right. Instead of understanding emotions are moving in this kaleidoscopic way because they're helping you make sense of the world and helping you take actions that are appropriate to what's happening. Right? They come to help.
So I want to just clarify for our audience, Jacob, our awesome producer and events manager, has posted in the chat on YouTube, and it'll be there for people down the road, a guide to the language of your emotions chart that Carla has shared with everybody. That was just up on the screen. So go ahead. It's a Dropbox box link. Is it okay if we leave that up long term, Carla, or will it come down at some point?
No, everybody should know about their emotions. There's no downside.
Okay, great. So it's going to stay up there, and people listening to this or watching this later, you can also access it. If you're listening on a podcast site, just go to our YouTube channel and you'll find it in the YouTube description. Okay, this book has 4 parts. The first is introducing the wisdom in your emotions. And one of the parts I wanted to touch on with you is the 4 keys to emotional genius. Can you give us an overview of those 4 keys?
There are many things that we're taught, and it's reinforced continually about emotions that make it almost impossible to work with them. And I called these the 4 problems in a previous book, but now I put the happy face on them and turned them into the 4 keys. And I changed them around depending on the book, but they're always the same 4. The first is there's no such thing as a negative emotion, and there's no such thing as a positive emotion. And if you believe that emotions are positive and negative, it is highly unlikely that you will ever learn to work with them. Because what that frame does is it gives you a group of emotions that are negative, so we don't want to have them, we don't want to show them, we want to move them away. So we lose our capacity to understand those emotions, right? They're trash. If I tell you an emotion is positive, you're going to want to have it all the time. You're going to want to have a moisturizer made out of this emotion. And you're going to want to have this emotion displayed and active. You want to kind of be a circus master of this emotion and make it dance around like a circus pony. You're going to become abusive to your own emotions because each emotion has a very specific thing to do. And the 3 positive emotions, I'm making the 3 allegedly positive emotions, have very specific jobs to do, and they can't do the jobs of the other emotions that were pushed away. So you end up having this split where of the 17 emotions, 3 of them, and there's 14 out here that you maybe suffer. I'm feeling that horrible emotion. I hope I get over it soon, instead of understanding that all emotions are necessary. They're all valuable. They're all valid. And they all have really specific jobs to do. And if you're in this positive and negative, you're not going to be able to figure that out. And everybody knows that there's positive and negative emotions. So that's one of the most powerful things is you got to get that out of there, because every emotion is positive when it's the emotion you want to have and the emotion that's appropriate. And every emotion, including happiness and joy, are negative or inappropriate if it's not time to be having them. Yeah. So that is the first thing. It's called valencing, and valencing is taking things into 2 categories. So even and odd numbers. Again, you've got that bifurcation, you got that separation of the good and the bad, the high and the low, the left and the right, right? This is very simplistic for something as complex as emotions. That's the first thing. The second is to understand that it is normal for emotions to arise in pairs and groups. That is, if emotions are parts of your intelligence and parts of your ability to function in the world, the more the merrier. You want them but you need to understand what they are before before you can work with them. So that's the natural way emotions work. The problem is we only have 4 words in the English language to describe how emotions work. And that goes back to the third piece, which is it is normal for emotions to arise at many different levels of activation, right? And your vocabulary here is crucial. If your feelings are, I feel bad and I feel good, that is not enough vocabulary. So in the book, I'll show you a little thing of it. It's an emotional vocabulary list by emotion. It's alphabetical, and it's got the emotions in soft, medium, and intense. And what they've found about vocabulary is that if you develop a better emotional vocabulary, a more granular emotional vocabulary, all by itself with no other intervention, you will develop better emotion regulation skills. So having words for your emotions is crucial. And that's why there's a free emotional vocabulary list on my site, and the vocab list is in all of my books.
Yeah.
Everybody needs it. Yeah.
All by itself, without any other intervention, just the
Yeah.
vocabulary can have that big of an impact.
Yeah. I mean, if you think, I just feel bad, well, what is bad, right? And let's get granular about it. If you're feeling anything in the anger category, let's say soft anger, I'm annoyed, I'm cranky, I'm irritated. Well, you're in soft anger, and anger is about boundaries. So how have your boundaries been crossed, and why is this emotion coming up to help you? Or maybe I feel soft sadness, I feel low, I feel relaxed, I feel restful, I feel disappointed, right? That if you have enough words, then you can understand these aspects of the soul or aspects of the brain that are coming forward to help you. Whereas bad, what do you got there? There's nothing there. So yeah, and the more words you have, the more awareness you have of a thing.
Right, that makes sense, because you have to actually hone your awareness in order to determine which is the actual term to apply to how you're feeling.
Yeah, and in that way, you are regulating your emotions. You're identifying them, you're sorting them, you're trying to figure out what's going on. And if you have this little chart, then you can figure out what each emotion is doing and how it's working for you.
Wow. Okay, I think we should finish these 4 key things, but I do want to talk about what the emotions do for us and maybe some examples of that.
Okay. The fourth is to channel your emotions. And I don't mean channel them like, it's a dead person coming and talking through you. But what I mean is channeling, like creating a channel for something to go the way that it needs to go. So if, for instance, I have anxiety, I'm feeling anxiety, and the overall thing is you need to calm down, right? That is not channeling anxiety, that is channeling something else, right? Because anxiety doesn't come when it's time to calm down. Anxiety comes when it's time to get the task done, right? And so if you try to calm it down, you're not channeling that emotion. So there are practices for anxiety. They're specific to anxiety to help it help you. It's like help me help you. Help me help you, anxiety. So that is what channeling is. And those are the 4 keys to enter into a new relationship with your emotions.
Okay. The way I'll remember channeling my emotions is that I need to Jerry Maguire my emotions. Help me help you.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to recap that for our audience, what we just talked about was the 4 keys to emotional genius that Carla outlines. And there are no negative emotions or positive emotions. There's emotional nuance, which means they show up to different degrees: soft, medium, intense. There's multiple emotions. They show up in groups. That's normal. And learning to channel them to use them for their benefit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Part 2 of the book, before we get into the genius in each emotion, there's some what you call empathic mindfulness practices. You talk about mindfulness-oriented practices that focus only on observing emotions and letting them pass through us. So how are empathic mindfulness practices different?
So many mindfulness practices that I learned were about, calming the body, becoming aware of what is, and kind of uh, allowing emotions to pass by, right? So you become sort of um, you become, I don't know, fluid or something. You don't react. You don't react to the emotions, and that's a good idea when you're starting out, right? Because emotions can be very powerful, and if you don't have any skills, you're just going to feel like, you are the ping pong ball in the game. But once you know how to do that, it's important to then don't let the emotions go by, but understand specifically what they're doing. And the empathic mindfulness practices actually use emotions in the practices so that you can befriend them. And we use emotions in their soft, kind of nuanced level. Sadness, for instance, is grounding and relaxing and releasing. Anger and shame are setting a boundary at the soft level. There's nobody's going to hit you. Um, and fear, which is your intuition and your instincts, is a way to focus. So we just identify what emotions are being used in what were previously thought of as emotionless practices, right? When you know emotions at their soft level, you'll see them. You'll see them everywhere, but you won't call them their real name. If someone's really good with boundaries, you would say they're self-aware, they're focused, they know who they are. You won't even know that anger's there. You won't even have an idea. If people are very fluid, if they're good at letting things go that don't work, if they're kind of graceful in this world, they're working with sadness, right? But you wouldn't know that. You would never call them sad, right? So there's so much that we don't know about emotions that because we've been pushed away from them. So with the empathic mindfulness practices, you're actually working with the emotions and you know it, right? So that you can um, come into a really good working relationship with them.
This is so fascinating. I'm really love this. I know you were maybe going to lead us through a short practice. I think it was conscious questioning for anxiety. Maybe before we do that, I'll just remind our audience, we're going to take some of your questions in the last 15 minutes or so. So feel free to keep them coming in as we move along here. And I'll pass over to Carla now. We'll do a little practice together.
I spoke about anxiety and what it does. If I look at this sheet, anxiety is focus, motivation, and completion. And the gifts it brings are foresight, focus, task completion, preparation, and procrastination support system. Procrastination is a perfectly valid way to work with anxiety. You won't hear that anyplace else. But um, the questions for anxiety that we ask are, what brought this feeling forward? Because you want to focus on, it could be anything, right? Just focus. And then what truly needs to be done? Because anxiety is a very large frame emotion. It keeps an eye on everything, and it helps to focus yourself when your anxiety, especially when it's very activated, that you can run around, like a chicken with its head cut off, and put a check down and then go do this, and then you're polishing the doorknobs and where's that check, right? So it's really important to help anxiety focus itself. And there's a specific practice that I teach called conscious questioning for anxiety, where you help anxiety focus and home in on what's important. That really helps anxiety. Writing practices are also specific for anxiety because it's a very active emotion that wants to get things done. But if you are not moving that anxiety out, for instance, onto paper, or you can type as well, what happens is your short-term memory gets very, very full, and it doesn't like to hold very much stuff, right? So what you do when you're writing is you're actually sort of helping anxiety. You're saying, okay, this is on the paper, and now we can clear out that. so that anxiety and you can focus yourselves. So conscious questioning for anxiety is you just take a piece of paper and I'll ask, this is in the workbook, so it exists. So you can do a longer version, but I'll ask about 5 of the questions for conscious questioning for anxiety. First thing you do at the top of your paper is you write something you're anxious about, right? It could be any kind of task coming up, any deadline, anything you've got to get done, and you're kind of spinning about it. So, oh, okay. So I'm writing down one. Okay. And with conscious questioning, you know you're doing it. That's what brings consciousness to it, and you're supporting your anxiety and you're supporting yourself. Um, so if we think of what truly needs to be done right now, um, a nice thing to ask is, have you achieved or completed something similar in the past? And you can just write down the answer if it's yes or no. If yes, you can just write quickly. It was like that time I did that thing for Dave. That's fine. Nobody's going to read it. Nobody needs to know. This is your own inner language, right? So that's the question, have I achieved or completed something similar in the past? A second question is, what are my strengths and resources about this task or this deadline or this thing that needs to get done? What are your strengths and resources? Right? And you can just write down a couple. I'm going to write down superb crankiness. But you didn't see what I wrote for the task. Okay.
Superb crankiness. I haven't heard that one before. I've seen it in action, but I never heard it named that.
Another question would be, why is this important? I don't think your anxiety would arise if it wasn't important. It's kind of marking importance. It's creating meaning out of this. Another question is, what do I need to do to prepare? What do you need to gather? The second to last question in this small practice is, can you delegate anything, any part of this?
That's a good one.
Yeah, people don't delegate when their anxiety is really high. They tend not to. And then to think, what is one small task related to this deadline or task or project? What is one small task that you could complete right now? Valentina, this technique works for anxiety when it is mostly working on its own. It can be working with other emotions. With severe anxiety and the body is shutting down, that is panic. And so what we would work for first is panic. And then panic and anxiety can kind of step away from each other. And you can begin working with each emotion individually. But when panic's there, you have to focus on panic first. Because it's a life-saving emotion, you don't wanna, like, do tasks. You wanna make sure that your body is safe and that your panic is, addressed.
So that's she was calling it low level anxiety, but you're saying high level anxiety is what she's referring to is actually panic,
Yeah.
right?
We call it pangxiety because there's no word for it, panic plus anxiety, right? They're both there. And there's a lot of different reasons why panic and anxiety move together like that. Um, because anxiety is the emotion of motivation. Um, it If panic and anxiety are really connected in that way, it could be that you'd have a difficult time doing tasks or deadlines, right? That they're really welded together. And so that requires a different practice. Well, thank you. And that is a short conscious questioning for anxiety. And if it doesn't work, if it makes you angry or depressed, then anxiety and those emotions are connected. I have a book called Embracing Anxiety where I talk about the emotions connected to each other. Yeah.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about anger. I was interested in the third section of the book. You give the 17 emotions, and the anger family you say is about boundaries, rules, and behavioral guidelines. And anger itself you call the honorable sentry. Can you talk about the meaning, the purpose, the wisdom in anger?
From the little worksheet, I the gifts of anger are honor and conviction, healthy self-esteem, proper boundaries, healthy detachment, and protection of self and others. And the questions are, what do I value and what must be protected and restored?
I think it's the other side, Jacob, you're showing. Oh, there
Yeah,
it
there
is.
it is. It's the purple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And with anger, now here's another emotion that runs with panic, and we call it panger, which is panic plus anger. If there is any fight, flee, or freeze behavior in your anger, panic is there. And I had often wondered why panic and anger they're like this. They're like anxiety and panic. And I was like, what is it in our modern world that makes panic so necessary in like basic things like setting a boundary or maintaining your boundaries or motivation? Why is panic in our motivational motion? What's going on? That answer is end stage capitalism. Okay. I blame capitalism for that one. You can't, I mean, your motivation and your survival as a person are really closely wound up in capitalism. So that makes sense. But with anger, anger is who you are, it's your self-image. It's who you've decided to be. It's what you value. And if that is continually battered and broken into and disregarded, then you really are in a kind of danger. And panic is valid there. These emotions aren't making mistakes. So when panic and anger come forward, then again, like we talked about in anxiety, you want to work with the panic first because panic is saying there's severe danger here, right? I got some fight, I got some flee, I got some freeze. I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna help you. Um, and for a lot of people, the only anger they've ever seen is rage and panger, right? If you're in rage, if you are fighting, if you are, punching it out verbally or whatever, we've got panic there because anger does not have a fight component. Panic does. So a lot of people don't know anger at all. And if they see it, if they see clear anger without panic attached, they would never call it anger. They wouldn't. They would call it, that person is self-aware, that person is grounded, that person has their own ideas in this world, that person is well boundaried. So a lot of the things that we see with anger, as with anxiety, is really panic helping. And it's, for me, it's fascinating because these emotions just, for many people, this is anger and panic. They don't even know that there's two emotions here. They can't get them apart. And so it takes some practice.
Right. I'm very curious to know about. It's come up a couple times in my mind now, and I want to ask you. Let's say someone's dealing with what we might commonly call chronic anger, which, from what you're describing, probably has a lot of panic
Oh,
infused
yeah.
in it.
Yeah.
When we're not responding appropriately to what's happening presently, and it's rooted in something we're carrying from the past or we haven't resolved, how do you discern that, and how do we start working with it through the lens you're working with?
Yeah. I think if you see someone who's just, whenever they go to anger, they go to anger 11, it goes to 11. And what most people would say is, you need to work on your anger and you need to take anger management courses because that problem is within you. But anger is one of the 4 social emotions. So what I would ask is, what is going on around you all the time that makes you feel that is battering at your boundaries? It's not just a little poke in your boundary. These people may feel boundaryless, and they may feel under attack most of the time. If in an earlier part of their life they had a boundary, boundary damage, abuse in childhood will definitely damage your boundaries.
Even
That
emotional abuse, I would guess.
emotional abuse, physical, sexual, there's many ways that you can break a child's boundaries. And as they grow, they may learn to use anger and rage to set a boundary, which I'm like, yay for you. At least you're in the right emotion, right? But what we need to do in that instance is learn to identify anger when it's soft so that you can learn how to deal with it. So you're not always going to 11. It's a retraining process. And then I have a boundaries practice to help people start to create those boundaries again. I was boundaryless. I dealt with pretty severe childhood abuse at a very early age, like 3. And I didn't have boundaries. And I was a raging kid. I was hard to be around. But the rage was the only thing that could keep me safe. Right. And so I learned to do it. I had to physically learn how to not go to rage. It was a practice. It took me a while. So it's a habit that was very important for protecting an unprotected little kid. But it's a habit that doesn't work so well in a corporate boardroom.
Right.
Oops.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I feel there's like a natural lead into one of the questions from our audience here, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
This is from Rosalie, and she says, thoughts about trauma and how different emotions might be stored in the body.
For everyone is different. And all emotions are stored in the body. All emotions come from the body. So you can't have emotions if you don't have a body. It's like, check mark, I'm alive. I own a body. So I think it would be more stored in behavior or stored in expectations of what the world is and has been. So, for instance, the person running around with panger and rage all the time has a preconceived notion based on really good data, from earlier. There's really good data. Is a good scientist, but isn't really in the present moment. So most of the empathic mindfulness practices are about getting into the present moment, not to give yourself an artificial sense of calmness, but to help your emotions come into now. And if they still need to talk about what happened before, which is a really important part of healing, um, then you may have sort of an emotion subroutine going that is going to talk to you about how it was. And getting these skills and knowing the emotions can help you sort of like take a speed train um, in healing, because now you're with the parts of your psyche that actually perform the healing, which is your emotions. So it can be, cattywampus and really clumsy at first, but eventually you'll get it, and you and your emotions will be able to come into the present time and say, that was some terrible crap that we dealt with. I'm like, yeah. And today we're going to the zoo. It's like, it's a very loving relationship back and forth instead of the way that it can be in some psyches. Yeah.
Mhm. Thanks. There's a question here from Tristan, and he's referencing a person. Tristan, maybe you can type in the chat who you're referencing, but I'll share it anyways because it's a good question. So he quotes somebody, I'm not sure who it is, and the quote says, "The feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends your understanding of the world." He calls it the quote unquote spiritual emotion and writes about how it helped him process his brother's death, even while exploring quantum possibilities in grief. And then Tristan's question is, I'd love to hear your perspective. How do you see emotions like awe, empathy, and compassion connecting to spirituality of the soul? Oh, and here the person he's referencing is, I don't know how to pronounce this
Is it
name, Acker Keltner.
Dotcher or Docker? I can't
Yeah.
remember. I would say awe is in the area of joy, right? And joy is a brilliant emotion that everybody wants to have more of, but the Tao Te Ching calls it the most dangerous emotion. And the reason for that is one of the things joy does is it drops your boundaries. You don't need your fear, which is your intuition. You don't need a lot of your emotions. You don't need depression because you're in an uptake. What joy does is it helps you drop your boundaries and uptake this new experience. It should be momentary, but for a lot of people, they like to jack into their joy, and like, don't do that. And so what happens is they have a lot of boundary loss and stuff like that. I just wanted to say that awe and joy need to be time limited. And as who is it that says after the ecstasy, the laundry?
Yeah.
The
I feel
Buddhist
like
teacher.
it's a Zen
Yeah,
saying.
Jack Cornfield. Okay.
Yeah.
So he says, yeah. So I would see empathy not as an emotion, but empathy is first and foremost an emotional skill. And compassion is, in my model, a part of empathy. So for people who have a spiritual bent, and not everybody does, then that would connect them to a sense of spirituality or whichever religion is most valuable to them. But for people without a religion, that would give them kind of a peak experience. It's not only the experience and the emotions, but how you were socialized into different belief systems. It still works in an atheist, right? But it can give you a sense of something larger than yourself. Yeah, and that's primarily joy. There's also an aspect of empathy where you open yourself to everything that is, and it's wonderful. And then boundaries, right? The laundry.
Yeah. I when you mentioned about not staying, like people turning up those emotions like awe and joy and staying there too long, is that kind of what's going on when someone would have what we call like a manic episode?
Yeah, a manic episode is joy that stays too long. It's other things too. It's a part of brain chemistry. Um, but But yeah, and you see that kind of, that heedlessness. I had a friend who would paint, like, for 62 hours in a row, and they're beautiful paintings, and not eat, right? And then spend a whole bunch of money, and then go have a lot of sex with people, right? And we would just stand on the outside going, "Oh my god." But it was all joyful. It was all a peak experience. And then she'd crash, and then go into it. But seeing that, I went, okay, I understand the Tao Te Ching now. I understand that whole dangerous emotion thing. But yeah, yeah. Oh, cults or other high control groups that are unhealthy use joy. It's called love bombing, to unground people and help them kind of lose their sense of self. So yeah, be careful, be careful, careful, kids.
Did someone comment about cults?
No, I'm a cult researcher.
Oh,
so, so I just thought, oh yeah,
oh yeah, cults.
yeah, cult.
There's a question here from Jordan who says, what kind of emotions are related to enmeshment or emotional entanglement? And what practices would be helpful for becoming unenmeshed?
Enmeshment is a boundary issue. So it would be not enough anger, and there's be some fear because your intuition and instincts are not panic isn't there because it's not protecting you. So there's a couple of emotions that are not there rather than emotions that are making it happen. Enmeshment is you don't have strong enough boundaries, and to unenmesh or to individuate would be to find ways to create your own boundaries and ask the anger question: what do I value, and what must be protected and restored? Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you. Aaron is asking, Carla, can you comment on how to get through a panic attack? I have a panic disorder, and my panic attacks last for hours and are related to a recent trauma.
Mhm. While you're in it, that's hard, and that's more a question for someone who can help you manage mm, your organism, right? It could be some kind of a soothing practice, some kind of a soothing medication or something like that. But for me, the way to work around panic attacks is to work with them while you're calm. It's kind of like a kid who has tantrums. It's not the same, but I'm making a connection. You don't ever talk to a kid in a tantrum, right? You're not going to get anywhere. Is talk to the child when they're calm and then help them create skills for the next time that happens. So that, the next time you feel really, 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 really angry, what do you think you could do that's different? You can also talk to your panic in that way, and somatic experiencing is a really good way to work with panic. It's very loving, it's very gentle. They don't make you do anything, and I find that one of the most helpful things. Is created by Peter
Peter,
Levine.
Peter Levine, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It understands what panic is doing there, and um, it helps you work through panic in its own way, rather than for like let's calm this down, let's make panic go away. It has a really important job to do, and so we often need help with an emotion that powerful. Yeah.
These are great questions, folks. I think we have time for one more. It's from Heather, who says, I notice you separate envy and jealousy. Can you explain the difference? I'm glad this got asked.
Yeah, these are two of the social emotions. The social emotions are anger, shame, jealousy, and envy. I call jealousy and envy these sociological emotions because their job is to help us position ourselves appropriately and healthfully in our social milieu, right? And jealousy, I call it relational radar. It is intimately connected to your love relationships and your close family relationships, like father, mother, child. Um, it's about helping you find and nurture loyalty, love, intimacy, connection, and commitment. And the questions are: what kinds of intimacy do I desire and want to offer? And what betrayals must be recognized and healed? Most people only see jealousy when someone's like wildly jealous and very suspicious. But jealousy works before you get into a relationship to like totally look at the person and see if they are going to be loyal and functional. If you know that jealousy is doing that. A lot of us just choose a version of our parents, and let's hope we had good parents, because that's not a way to choose. Envy, I call it interactional radar. It brings you fairness, security, generosity, access to resources, recognition, and approval. So it helps you understand the interactions. The questions are, what resources and security do I desire for myself and others? And what inequalities must be made right? If you are a worker for justice and equality, you are an envy professional. Thank you.
Wow. Wow.
Mhm.
That's really good to understand those distinctions. Really good. Thanks everybody for your fantastic questions. And we're getting lots of great feedback here. People have been really loving this, and a number of people have said they've either already got the book or it's on the way. They've ordered it. We've been talking to Karla McLaren, and her new book is this Language of Emotions Workbook, a practical guide to reveal the wisdom in each of your feelings. Of course, it's a companion to The Language of Emotions, the book she wrote in 2010, and there's a revised edition of that came out in 2023 as well, if you want to check it out. Any closing thoughts for us, Karla? Anything you want people to know about, how they can engage with you? I think you might have a new book coming out in 2025 even.
I just can't stop. I just can't stop myself. There was I think it was a Hungarian, no, it was a Czech translation of my book, and they're on Instagram, and they talk to me in Czech. I'm like, okay. So I translated it with, the translate thing on Instagram, and it said, your emotions are the key to your recovery. And I was like, thank you, Czech language. Right? Your emotions are the key to your recovery. Trust them. They're your friends.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyen Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyen Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyen.com.